the United States recently changed the status of its troops in Iraq from, combat troops to non-combat troops. I mean, you can call it whatever you like. It's still an occupation. Just because the U.S. left after invading Iraq in 2003 and then came back all of a sudden to fight ISIS doesn't mean it's not an occupation. Why do you think that the Hashd al-Sha'bi exists, the popular mobilization units? Yeah, in one part because they're actually fighting ISIS. It's not an excuse. And they're also against the U.S. occupation. So you can call it whatever you like. It's still an occupation. And you can change the label of the troops. It's still an occupation. You're still angering people because Iraqis don't want you on their land. Would you like Iraqis on American soil? Would you like Iraqi soldiers coming and building a base in Washington, D.C., the size of Vatican City? Pretty sure they wouldn't like it, right? So why do you do that to others? That's not okay. And you can call it whatever you like. It doesn't change the reality on the ground. So whether that would affect the situation in Syria, well, we have to understand something. When we talk about the resistance in Iraq is very much intertwined with the resistance in Syria. The Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular mobilization units, they have the blessing of the Syrian government to operate in Syria, right? They're legally operating in Syria as opposed to the Americans who are illegally inside Syria. And when it comes to Iraq integrated the PMU into the armed forces. So that's really interesting because these popular mobilization units are literally part of the Iraqi armed forces. That's how big they are. They had to integrate them into in an official capacity. And so when we talk about fighting ISIS, the U.S. is not fighting ISIS. The U.S. helped create ISIS. The U.S. has helped these terrorist groups to flourish. The ones who are actually fighting ISIS are Syria, the Hashd al-Sha'bi, or PMU, the Russians, Iran, Hezbollah. These are the people who actually fought ISIS. Because once they entered the war, well, guess what? That turned the tide, right? In 2018, you had these jihadist groups on the doorstep of Damascus. I mean, just before that. But when we talk about Jobar, for example, the Syrian army wouldn't have been able to do that in 2018. And when the Russians entered in 2015, 2016, everything changed, right? So Aleppo, they had a major victory there. And Damascus was about to fall, and it didn't. So, the U.S. just uses this excuse to fight ISIS. They're not fighting ISIS at all. It's just to plunder the oil in Syria and keep Iraq under occupation so they can antagonize Iran because, right, they share a border. And when it comes to Syria, this is the funny thing because if you go on Twitter, they even have an account. The U.S. occupation in Iraq even has a Twitter account, Operation Enduring Freedom, just the most corny names you can think of. And what do they say? They say that, we're here to fight Daesh. We're here to fight ISIS. In Syria, they don't even say anything. They don't even have some pretentious bullshit excuse. They're just in Syria. Right? They're just in Syria. And that's one of the reasons they don't like Trump. Not because he's different from them, but because he's a loud mouth. And he said, we're keeping the oil. So, he's just as much a thief as other American presidents. And he's just as much an agent of corporate America. But he just says, the quiet part out loud. So they're taking the oil. They're not even pretending to fight ISIS in Syria. And if they're so good at it, like, explain one thing to me. Why does ISIS continue to exist? Why do they keep finding new leaders? Obviously, the strategy isn't working. What did work, however, is the resistance pushing all of these terrorists into Idlib. That worked. And that's why when you looked at a map of Syria a few years ago, half the map was black under ISIS. It's not anymore. And that's not because of the Americans. The Americans' idea of fighting ISIS, do you know what they did? Look at Fallujah in Iraq. Look at Mosul. They carpet bombed these cities. Carpet bombed them. And it's again this paradox where it's like, it's not okay for Russia and Bashar al-Assad to kill civilians while they're fighting terrorists, but it's okay and it's normal. It's normal for the United States to kill civilians while fighting terrorists. And it's killing mostly civilians. It's not a few, as if that's acceptable, right? As if the U.S. has any business killing anyone in this part of the world or anywhere outside its borders. But it's normalized. Like, yeah, of course there's collateral. We can't do anything. It's just, it's the way it is. And we minimize civilian casualties. No, not really. Not really. Right? So this is, again, a double standard in the media, how they demonize Russia and Syria. And most of the time, it's not even true. Like, we literally have proof of these false flag attacks, whether it's chemical weapons or otherwise. And so they come in and act like they're doing good. They're doing some kind of good for the region. They're not. They're not. Absolutely not.